Hello, my name is Erin Reedy. I am an intern at the Prince Mohammad bin Fahd program in the College of Sciences here at the University of Central Florida. Today, I am joined by Ambassador Harry Elam-Thomas. Ambassador Elam-Thomas has spent 42 years as a diplomat, with foreign assignments in Greece, France, Turkey, Belgium, Senegal, and Côte d'Ivoire. She has served in the U.S. Information Agency, the Foreign Service Personnel, the United Nations, and the White House, in addition to acting as U.S. Ambassador to Senegal from 2000 to 2002, before retiring with the rank of Career Minister. She is currently the director of the diplomacy program here at UCF and is the author of her forthcoming memoir, Diversifying Diplomacy, My Journey from Roxbury to Dakar, to be released this December. She holds a bachelor's in international business from Simmons College and a master's in public diplomacy from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. Ambassador, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
First, I would like to discuss your memoir, Diversifying Diplomacy. Can you tell me a bit about your book and what inspired you to write it?
I think we have UCF to thank because the students I taught for about 9 years earlier on in my time here kept saying, why don't you do a book? But I also must give credit to my husband who said you really should write down these experiences that you've had. And I thank John Bercia for introducing me to a superb co-author who did the research on the history of my family in such a way that I was enlightened. I must say I have not done the Ancestry.com or 23andMe test, but what he learned about my heritage gave me a sense of pride that I never really had about my ancestors, immediate family ancestors before.
That's wonderful. A major theme in your upcoming book is the gradual diversification of those working in diplomacy in the U.S. Beginning your career in the Foreign Service as a young black woman in 1971, as a pioneer in this effort of diversification, how do you believe the increase in representation of the Foreign Service contributes to success in diplomacy?
One of my top experiences in terms of career was when I was asked to go to Turkey. And I was welcomed there as well as in Greece, but mainly in Turkey with such open arms because many of the individuals I met when I was a desk officer for Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus said, you will understand us, because they were trying to be members of the European community, and they were the only Muslim country that was Islamic candidates for membership in the European Union. This is back in 1989, 1990. And as a person of color who had gone through the civil rights movement and struggled to have credibility writ large in this nation of ours, they felt that I would understand their challenges. They felt discriminated against in their attempts to be members of the European Union. If there were more individuals who represented really what America is truly like, we would have an understanding of why others sometimes are not very positive about us. Women approach issues in a very different manner than men. Albright, who has always been one of my heroines because of her path to become the first woman Secretary of State, would say, men had mothers, they had spouses, and when times became very difficult, they listened to them. We, as women, will be able to reach our male counterparts around the world in a far more credible way, less threatening than some male members of the diplomatic corps. And I found that to be true as well.
That was very insightful. Now, it is clear to me that you have a strong commitment to your work, and I wonder what inspired you first to pursue a career in the Foreign Service.
When I was 19, I was an exchange student in southern France. And for the first time in my life, somebody said, "Ah, la noire, comme elle est belle." No one had ever said I was pretty before. I knew nothing about makeup, knew nothing about what to do with my hair. I was one of 10 students on this exchange program, and the only one who looked like me. And I'm walking through the streets of Lyon, France, and someone makes this comment. All of a sudden, I felt very different about myself. I began to like myself. Because you have to remember, I grew up in the late 50s, early 60s, at a time when someone looking like me, growing up in Boston, Massachusetts, didn't have a lot of credibility in terms of what he or she might do career-wise. So it was the exchange experience in southern France with the experiment in international living that truly opened my eyes to the world.
As you said, you speak French, but you also speak Greek and Turkish. In your experience, how important or helpful is it to be able to directly communicate with people in other countries while working on diplomacy with them?
It's absolutely critical. I do remember that whenever I was invited to a home of top writers, artists, journalists in Athens, I didn't have to have an interpreter. When there's a third person in the room, it truly breaks that line of genuine communication. And I would often say to my students, if you're working with an interpreter, please do not respond to the interpreter when a question is asked. Keep your eyes focused on your interlocutor. There is also the fact that people are going to enjoy you even more or feel comfortable in your presence. If you even say just the amenities, you watch how people's faces and their demeanor changes when you say bonjour or merhaba, nasılsınız or yasotikanis. And if you do it with genuine eye contact and a smile, that breaks the ice. And when you have to deliver a difficult message, it's a lot easier to do it in their native tongue.
After your 42 years as a diplomat and as the current director of UCF's diplomacy program, I feel safe calling you an expert on the subject. What do you believe to be the most important skills needed by someone considering a career in diplomacy like yourself?
First and foremost, humility, because as Americans of any color or any gender or any sexual orientation, we have a high opinion of ourselves. I've seen it overseas in every embassy where I've worked or I've had to visit and deliver presentations. There is an air about those people. This happened in Denmark, and at that point I said to my staff members from USIA, you cannot say that. You are a guest in their country. The absence of trying to superimpose your power and your views on someone else will give you an automatic rapport that you might not have had if you just assumed that you were going to go and change everybody's view of the world because of the way you have been brought up. I often said to students, if you are studying geography or history in Asia, you will not see the North American and South American continent in the middle of the map in the front of your face in the room. You're going to see Asia. We are so used to seeing ourselves first and foremost in every discipline that we tend to forget there is a world out there and that we are not the only game in town. We're not the only country on the planet.
You've had multiple foreign assignments in countries that have had tense political relations with the U.S. at that time. Were there situations where you had to work with people who came into a situation maybe immediately opposed to any solution or with a general unwillingness to cooperate? And what strategies would you have implemented to change their minds or to try and find an acceptable alternative solution for all those involved?
I'll give you two examples. My first experience was when I was a very junior diplomat in the Côte d'Ivoire, and a journalist who was not very positive about the United States. In fact, very critical of the United States. But this is back in 1977 to 79, so this is before 9/11, etc. He was so anti-American that I had to really work hard at convincing the country team to accept him as a recipient of an international visitor grant. And my reasons were as follows. It is far more important to send someone who is critical to the United States to have him or her have their eyes open to how things absolutely really work in the United States than what they perceive as what America is all about. After 6 months, I convinced the country team. He came to the United States. He returned to the Ivory Coast. He was not pro-American, but he was far more balanced in his writings about the United States. In the second instance, I knew that this is in Turkey. We had a question about disinformation and the role of, we hear about that now, journalists who were writing articles saying that Americans were feeding the PKK, the group from northern Turkey, and they were certainly not being fed by the United States military or our government, but it was a disinformation program. I went to the editors of this newspaper, a very fundamentalist newspaper, with my senior Turkish colleague, and spent 45 minutes explaining to them how wrong they were. I think they listened out of sheer shock that I was able to handle this discussion in Turkish. The next day, we received an apology in the Turkish press on the front page. I think that was another beginning of how I moved up in the Foreign Service, because no one had expected an apology for having stated something that was totally incorrect in a newspaper, or it usually appears on page 75. This was on the first page. I think that I didn't change their policies in that sense, but I did help the public see that there are times when there is something that is not totally true. And because I had done my research, and because I had communicated in their language, my senior Turkish assistant said, in the 30 years I've worked at this embassy, a consulate in Istanbul, I had never seen an apology. This was incredible. I will also say that it's not easy to change people's policy views. But what you can do is to express understanding of where they're coming from. And you learn to listen. Listening is the most important part of diplomacy. And I did successfully listen to others and then incorporate their views, so that when my response was given to them, it was not as if I were telling them what to do, but I would let them feel that I incorporated their true desires in what we, the U.S. government, was going to say. We do get talking points, but we now know, as Ambassador Pickering says, you know how to work those talking points into your discussion without being overbearing.
Those were great examples. Now, as a career rather than a politically appointed diplomat, how have you noticed diplomacy change between presidential administrations?
There has been a long tradition of political and career appointees throughout the world. In some countries, mainly they're political appointees. I can say that early on in my career, the percentage was usually 60% career, 40% political. And as time went on, I would say going back to the Clinton administration first, you saw that number increasing. And every year, every 4 years, you saw a larger number of political appointees being named as chiefs of mission ambassadors. There are positive and negative sides to that, and I will discuss quickly the positive ones. Most countries want to have somebody who has a direct line to the White House. So most political ambassadors have a close rapport with, if not the president, the vice president, or high level of the cabinet. And so the receiving country perceives that as a step up. That said, we, the U.S. government, will always put a deputy chief of mission who is a career person, who will understand how an embassy operates, the personnel, the budget, the finances, how you do diplomatic notes. If I had run a corporation, I would not know a thing about diplomatic notes. There are times when they are far more effective than career individuals, but I will say that one of the ways that I learned to be an effective diplomat was watching a political appointee who was my ambassador in Brussels. He came to the cafeteria and had lunch with his staff members. People visiting Brussels were thrilled just to see the ambassador. Well, he was very gregarious, and he didn't sit in his ivory tower. Until then, I had not really seen ambassadors do that kind of interaction with their staff in the cafeteria. Yes, there are those who may not know the capital of the country where they've been nominated and they don't get through their confirmation hearings. But I often think of Arthur Burns, who was our Secretary of the Treasury, who became our ambassador to Germany, who was superb. There are political appointees who are very effective, but then there are those who are not. The Inspector General Corps will let us know very quickly those who have not been successful. But I think that in this day and time, we have to accept the fact that what was the general mode is not the case any longer. And careerists are going to have to be ready to step and fill in the void. In fact, until some ambassadors are appointed.
Speaking about the void, the U.S. State Department is currently suffering from a historic amount of vacancies. How do you see this personnel shortage affecting the U.S.'s role abroad and their ability to successfully work on diplomatic matters?
It's critical. Yes, I'm a career diplomat, and yes, I've spent 17 years with Greece, Turkey, and Cyprus, and 11 years on the continent of Africa. So it's the Middle East, Europe, and Africa. And I've learned about their cultures. And no matter how well-informed the careerist may be in the geographic areas, the heads of state and the foreign ministers of countries around the world do not want to meet with second, third, fourth, fifth experts in any issue. They want to speak with the Assistant Secretary or the Secretary of State. They want to speak with the Deputy Assistant Secretary. They do not want to speak with the desk officer, who may be far better informed. And so, thanks to the media, the world knows this exists. And so we are concerned about how America is perceived abroad. I will be very candid with you. I spent 3 weeks in France this summer, and in each taxi, people would say to me, "What is going on?" They were from East Asia. The taxi drivers were from North Africa. They were from probably refugees from other countries. But they know what is happening in the world, and they were concerned. So that the absence of senior people in the diplomatic service presents a serious, serious flaw in terms of our credibility abroad.
After serving 42 years as a diplomat for the U.S., what major changes have you witnessed in the way that we work on diplomacy?
There's something called Diplomacy 2.0, which is a reference to media, social media. No one is going to wait even for an email now to deliver a message, because tweets and all of the social media platforms allow us to communicate with a generation of new leaders who will be coming into power throughout the world. I see this as a very positive, as well as sometimes a rather negative aspect of the way we are handling our diplomacy. Because initially, we would be sending a message out to the world using one of the social media platforms, but not listening to what the audience was saying. So you can use social media to deliver a message, but you also have to remember it needs to be a two-way communication. When I asked this question when I was in Dubai with one of our career diplomats there, he said that is a serious problem. We also assume that because we have access to this, we can send out a video that says how all the Muslims are doing very well in the United States, and that this is going to make us loved by the rest of the world. Well, in that part of the world, they didn't even use the material we sent out because it was so patronizing. So whenever we use new technology, we have to be sure that we're thinking about the cultural context in which it's being used, and making certain that we are not delivering a counterproductive message no matter how hard we're trying to be diplomatic. But the new media is a very, very challenging and yet very effective way to communicate. No one is waiting for the State Department, Secretary of State, or the President to deliver a message to an embassy for the ambassador to take to the foreign ministry, because it's done electronically. But again, given WikiLeaks, we know that it's not always secure. So that's another challenge. Cybersecurity is one that we live and work with and have our being each and every day now. And that is very, very serious.
Those were great points. Now, if you were speaking to a room full of students with dreams of working in the Foreign Service like you one day, what advice would you want to give to them?
Learn the language and culture of the country where you will be assigned. Be open to the views from outside your your initial perceptions of that country. Ask them what they know about the United States, because they will know more than you ever imagined and will know in depth more about the United States. And also, present yourself as only one of many parts of America. And whenever you can, be sure to include all elements of our society so that they know that diplomats are not just those who went to Ivy League schools, those who went to learn the classics and have no idea what it's like to be suffering, which brings me to a reason why I've enjoyed my job here at the University of Central Florida. Students from this part of the world are going to bring a totally different perspective on world affairs. There are many who have come from Latin America and the Caribbean. They are not from families who went to Yale, Princeton, and Harvard. They understand what it must be like to be in a developing country, because many of their ancestors may have immigrated to the United States from places in the world where there wasn't water, there wasn't electricity. So they have an innate sensitivity that a lot of Ivy Leaguers may not have. So my advice to them would be, never forget from whence you came. Respect the lessons you were taught in your home, because they will prove extremely valuable to you in diplomacy.
That was a wonderful closing remark. Ambassador, it was a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for being here. That was Ambassador Harriet Elam-Thomas, Director of UCF's Diplomacy Program and author of her upcoming memoir, Diversifying Diplomacy, My Journey from Roxbury to Dakar. For the Prince Mohammad bin Fahd program, this is Erin Reedy. Thank you for listening.